Hi everyone, and welcome back to Write Better Together. This is Peggyann Kennedy, and joining me today for Writers Wednesday is my very extra special guest, Professor Quraysh Ali Lansana, or Professor Q as his students like to call him. And he has won a lot of awards, but he's also applied associate professor of English, creative writing, and media studies. And he's also the director of African American Studies program at the University of Tulsa. And he has won a lot of awards. And he recently got an Emmy for a documentary film on the Tulsa Race Massacre, was it?
That's correct.
And he received, I believe it was last year, Professor Q received a Distinguished Achievement Award from the Western Literature Association, and he won a 2022 Oklahoma Association of Broadcasters Award, and that's just to name a few. So you have done a lot, sir, and you're also the author of over 20 books in nonfiction, children's literature, and poetry. So I'd really love to hear a lot about your poetry. I'm a big poetry fan, but I'd love to hear a little bit about you and like what first inspired you to write.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast with you, Peggy, and you were a wonderful student of mine at TU and a really great writer. And I see nothing but a bright future for you in writing. So I hope that you continue to work and grow and evolve. Your foundation is already very solid. Um,
Thank you.
What inspired me to write? Was that the question?
Yes, sir.
Um, well, that's a great question, actually. I am the youngest of six children. I was born in 1964, and so I lived in a house full of my siblings' music. And I think that's continues to be a major influence. I still consider Stevie Wonder one of my greatest poetic influences. And I could sing the lyrics to his songs before I could spell them, right?
Mm.
And being raised in an AME church that was essentially the choir were my cousins, the choir director was one of my aunties, um, and so I was, along with several of my cousins, put front and center for many shows for church, so an Easter pageant or a Christmas play or something of that nature. And so, very early on in my life, at 6, 7, 8 years of age, um, I was learning the power of language not only from being in church and experiencing sermons and whatnot, but also from memorizing Christmas plays or what have you. And so I got a taste for performance and a taste for the power of language um, at a very young age, very very young age. I would also attribute my love of language um, to PBS, to the, the public broadcasting system, which we are unfortunately in this moment is being dissolved.
Really?
And yeah, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting dissolved yesterday, and
Oh,
it's a pretty significant um, aspect of the state of the country, right? That there will no longer be, or very soon, there will no longer be a Sesame Street, an electric company, all of the many, many shows that PBS has brought to the youth of this country in particular over the last, certainly my lifetime. And I grew up wanting to live on Sesame Street and got really close when I was in grad school. That's another story. But I do very strongly attribute that love of language, that love of that fascination with the power of language, with being a child growing up on Sesame Street. And Oklahoma has so many rural areas in the state where it is hard to get broadband, it's hard to get the internet, but Channel 13, and it's hard to get cable, but Channel 13 was always there, and it's always there. And so it is um, quite a thing that that CPB has dissolved for the what our youth are introduced to. And it's a great concern, but I am also digressing a bit from the question. But I would say between my siblings' music, um, growing up in the church, and being forced most likely, um, at least initially, to participate in all of these church related programs that involve me memorizing language and in public speaking, um, and PBS, and also being a bit of a dreamer. And so I wondered, I have a very distinct memory in third grade of my best friend at the time and I having a conversation walking either to or from school, um, asking ourselves things or one another things like, why is that called a chair? Why is that called a sofa? What's the difference between a sofa and a couch? Having no idea that we were talking about the etymology of language in third grade. But it speaks to, for me, to how I've always been fascinated by the power of language.
Okay, yeah. We as writers are just kind of naturally curious and we ask a lot of what if questions and why questions.
Yeah.
So I like that. And if you don't mind me asking, what were the steps that brought you kind of to where you are now? Like, how did you step into the world of writing? Did you have a mentor or something like that?
Well, I've had several mentors. I've been blessed to have several mentors throughout my career. I will say that, I fell in love with reading in the eighth grade. And I had wonderful teachers, particularly wonderful reading teachers, and maybe that's because I love reading. But fell in love with poetry really when I was in eighth grade reading class while being introduced to Beowulf, right? The poetry of Miss Gwendolyn Brooks, who would later become one of my mentors. And I was very privileged to be mentored by Miss Brooks for the last decade that she was with us. And also this brand new, at the time, this brand new form of poetry called rap. Um,
Oh, wow.
and all of three of those things, the storytelling and suspense of Beowulf, the poetry of Miss Brooks, which was urban and black, and musical in its and very musical. And then this thing comes out of the South Bronx called rap. And I'm like, wow, this is really bringing these things together for me as the power of language to be. And I've written an essay called Art, Artifice, and Artifact, right? And that essay is about how hip hop and rap poetry, as I call it, really sort of informed me, in 1976, 77, right? So, I was so those things are all a part of how I am and who I am, right? But in terms of mentors, certainly, I would say one of my first mentors was my journalism teacher in high school. And so my love of language, again, started in elementary school, started with reading, started with, Sesame Street, and then moved really into journalism. And so I worked on the staff of my high school newspaper, and the teacher who introduced me to journalism was named Cynthia Ray Doherty. May she rest in peace. And she was um, a great teacher and a great mentor and a great influence. On me in terms of again, another aspect of the power of language. So much so that I went to OU as a journalism undergraduate. Yeah, that's what I decided I wanted to do with my life. I had a great mentor at the University of Oklahoma named Dr. Bill McKean, who was one of the most noted scholars on the writer Hunter S. Thompson. And Dr. McKean was also a great influence and a great mentor for me while I was navigating undergrad. And it was in during my undergraduate years, my sophomore year of college, when I really started writing poetry seriously. And I started writing poetry seriously, really to yell, scream on a piece of paper as opposed to screaming at another human being,
Mm,
right? Most of my work, as has been the case for most of my career, was politically charged. Speaking to social issues, speaking to racism, speaking to class issues. And so I really started seriously writing journalism, or excuse me, writing poetry um, as a sophomore journalism student at OU. When after I had my first job in broadcast journalism in Oklahoma City, and I decided to move to Chicago. Um, and that was in 1989. It was a couple weeks after my 25th birthday. And I was guided to Chicago by the work of Miss Brooks, by the work of Baba Haki Aramada Booty, who is the founder and publisher of Third World Press, which is the oldest continuously publishing Black book company in the country. And certainly had no idea that I would, at the time when I moved, that these two giants in literature and in Black literature would take me under their wing and become mentors. And from those two, you know, I was I had the great privilege and honor of being, introduced to, some of the greatest writers, particularly greatest Black writers of the Black arts movement period and prior, and able to build, relationships with Mama Sonia Sanchez and Baba Miri Baraka and so many others. And those folks being able to reach out and touch them, to call them, was really, a blessing and an honor. And a privilege to be in that position, and that I was in that position or in those positions because of the direct mentorship of Miss Brooks and Baba Haki. Another mentor of mine was the late Lucille Clifton, who continues even in her living in as an ancestor, continues to inform and guide, how I approach the page, how my poems and how my writing see, as Miss Brooks would call it. So those are a few, and probably the most important mentors in my writing life, both from a journalism standpoint and from a poetry standpoint.
that's really awesome. It's really amazing how things sometimes just fall into your path, isn't it? It's just like the pieces just line up perfectly. That's kind of what's happened to me a little bit with this podcast, even. But I'd love to hear a little more about your journalism. I remember taking your journalism class a few semesters back, and it was just so different from any other kind of writing I've ever done. It's not like a term paper or a story. It's
Yeah, it's nonfiction, creative nonfiction journalism, however you want to frame it. It's a very different animal than, say, creative fiction, right, or even poetry. Although I do believe and teach that the best fiction and the best nonfiction involves rules of prosody, poetic elements, but it doesn't work in reverse, right? But yeah, my fascination with journalism really started again, probably in middle school, um, when the Watergate situation happened. So I'm that
mm,
old that the Watergate hearings were, and all of that went down while I was a teenager or just preteen. Um, and I was fascinated by the work of Woodward and Bernstein from the Washington Post. I was fascinated by all the President's Men, the book and the film, um, and fascinated again about again where all of this comes back to the power of language, and that these journalists could track and search and lived under, looked under rocks and everywhere possible to try and piece together um, clarity for the country in terms of what happened regarding the Watergate break-in and President Nixon really, really moved me, really opened my eyes again to this idea of truth and facts and language and the power again of language. So that's when I fell in love with journalism. I mean, at the time I was reading Dune and I was reading other things as well, but that's really when I started to really get it. Um, I also understood it by that time that I was not good at math, and so
I get
I,
that.
and so I needed to throw my dreams of being an architect out the window because that wasn't going to happen when I met Mrs. Thurman in seventh grade math. But the language and the reading, excuse me, and the search for truth and again in the vehicle of language to tell those stories really really moved me more so than I really probably even understood at the time. It probably again wasn't until high school that I really got it, and then decided that was going to always be a part of who I wanted to be. Was the idea of speaking truth to power, but also um, being able to ask questions to uncover truths that might be hidden or buried or veiled. Um, and that's just I think it's a part of who I am, since way back then.
I love that. That's really awesome. But how would you characterize your writing process in the writing community? I don't know if you've ever heard the terms plotter, pantser, plantser. Um, Plotter is someone who plans out the story or the poem or whatever it is very well to the T, knows the character shoe sizes and everything. And then pantser is just someone who just kind of flies by the seat of their pants, as my mother put it once, and just kind of writes without doing a lot of planning. And plantser, I believe, is kind of a little mix of both with a vague idea of what they want to write about, but still kind of just write what they want. So I was wondering which of those you would characterize yourself as.
That's a great question. I don't know that I fit any of those categories, but if I had to choose one, I'm probably closest to the combination of those two.
Okay,
Um,
Planter.
I And it really depends on if I'm working on a project or if I am essentially just sort of writing in my journal, which I try to do often, what's on my mind or in my heart, um, what comes to mind at the time. So if I'm working on a project right now, I'm kind of somewhat deep into um, an adult book on Ralph Ellison that is not quite biography or yeah, not quite biography, and not quite autobiography, and not and definitely not an academic book. It's an interesting kind of hybrid of things. But so I am, um, so that in that book, if I'm working on a project, it involves me being steeped in research, right? And so my ideas, I do the research first. My ideas, I pull from the research, um, whatever comes to mind from the reading that's relevant to the project, and then I write. Um, and so whether or not that is a poetry project. Say, um, my book, They Shall Run, Harriet Tubman Poems, which is a single volume that's exclusively connected to Tubman and her journeys, or this Ellison adult, nonfiction book that I'm working on. Um, I always try and immerse myself in research, immerse myself in as much knowledge of the subject matter, because that's where my ideas come from. That's where my questions come from. Um, and as I probably taught you or tried to teach you and other students, right? You always ask questions of what you're reading, right? You don't take it, for face value. You always ask questions of what you're reading. And so as I read, as I research, and I've got just about all of Ellison's books right here in front of me, um, I'm reading and I'm asking questions of the books and of the text based on my project, based on what it is that I want to get out of and how I want to use or cite whatever is in these books that I'm using as research for fodder for my questions, either to push against, or agree with, or further or advance, right? So research would be the big, probably the common thread for me is to immerse myself in the subject matter and pull my ideas, my questions, my thoughts, um, whether I'm confirming or denying my own thoughts or having new thoughts coming from that knowledge in terms of where I want to go with the roadmap or the arc of the book I'm working on. If I'm writing if I'm writing poetry, again, unless it's a project, say like the Tubman book, then really I'm just trying to sit down and collect my thoughts and get them down on, you know, in the journal before I go to the computer. I generally, for in terms of poetry, um, I'd say 90% of the time, I'm writing poetry. I'm writing drafts of poetry by hand, in a journal, and then I, construct, revise, um, on the computer. I very rarely, if almost never, compose on the computer for my poetry. For the nonfiction, yeah. Um, yeah, I definitely compose probably more on the computer. Um, but my process generally, again, it depends on the project, and then sometimes it depends on the genre. But what's consistent is that um, certainly if it's a project, I'm immersed in the research first. Um, if it's me writing about thoughts, of what's going on in the world right now, say, for example. I might read some newspaper articles on this or that, and for my own thoughts and get them down, in my journal before they go to the computer screen. But that generally speaks to my approach or my process.
Awesome, I like that. I also wanted to ask you about your time as a Tulsa fellow and mentoring other students like myself. Ever since I found out that you did mentor, I just thought that that was such an awesome thing to do, that you're continuing on to help others. That's really cool.
Well, I believe very strongly in giving back. That's the way I was raised. That's the way I was mentored. I would not be here if Miss Brooks and Dr. Mahabudi had not taken me under their wing, had not mentored me. And so I've always believed in giving back. I've always believed in very strong feelings about helping young writers get to where they want to go or beyond where they want to go. And I appreciate your acknowledging that. Not every artist, not every writer is like that. But that's a part of my DNA. That is part of that's how I was groomed. And probably even before I met Miss Brooks and Dr. Madabudi, going back to my parents and my aunties and my uncles, just a part of how I was raised. So um, yeah, it will always be. I have very difficult. I have a very difficult time with artists who are so narcissistic that they are not interested um, in helping others, particularly younger generations, in ways that they can, in ways that they are capable. Um,
Exactly.
that's just not a part of my DNA at all.
I believe that we really should help each other. I mean, there's so many ideas, plenty enough for all of us, and then some. So why not help each other? Help somebody, the next generation, get ahead.
Agreed.
Yeah, I like that. So what would you tell someone in the audience who might be interested in trying to get into writing but hasn't yet, or who doesn't know how to?
Well, the first thing I would say is read. Read everything. Read everything that's of interest to you, and try and read some things that are not of interest to you, but read everything. Because from reading and reading other writers, not only are you fed with ideas, and it makes your brain work, and brain muscles work in different ways, but also you are inherently collecting different writing aesthetic, different craft styles, different approaches, while you try to find your own, while you're shaping your own language. So, number one is to read. Number two, to me, is to experience other art. Um, not just read, but definitely read, but also go to plays, go to movies, go to poetry readings, go to the dance concert, or um, go hear live music, experience other art forms, as fodder, as food, as fuel, as inspiration, as other ways to again to experience language, and not just language but also emotion and emotional textures and emotional different emotional weights, because that can only help your writing. So the more diverse your stimuli, the more diverse your output. And so I believe that very much believe in that. So get out of the house sometimes and go hear some music, go to a play, go to a concert, what have you. Um, and I'll be honest with you, Peggy, and it took me a little while as both a writer, an author, and a professor to find some peace with what I'm about to say, but I do believe very strongly, and I've never really taught this before, but I do believe that imitation is the greatest form of flattery, right? And so I know many poets of my generation who have written in the form of or copied or emulated a style of a poem from a poet they admire from yesteryear or what have you. I've always tried to. I've never done that. I can't. I'd have to think of if I really. I mean, I've never done it consciously. I certainly have done it from, say, being a student of Miss Brooks, being a very involved and engaged student of Miss Brooks's poetry for the last 30 years. So I know that Miss Brooks shows up in my writing. Have I ever tried to write a poem that patterned or imitated Miss Brooks? Once. Um, but I know, but she shows up all the time. A colleague of mine recently told me that, yeah, Miss Brooks shows up in my work all the time. But I only consciously on one occasion said I want to write a poem in the style of Miss Brooks for this particular, you know, reason or what have you. But I do believe, even though I, again, rarely engage in it myself, I do believe that attempting to write a poem in a similar, rhythmic or syntactical structure as Miss Brooks or Rita Dove or whomever, um, that young poets um, can learn from that. You can learn from the actual feel of it, of doing it. And so, whether or not you're a poet or a novelist, a fiction writer, I think it's fun to try, and I think it can't do anything but help you flex different kinds of muscles,
Mm,
which will only help you grow, right? I evolved and this may still be the case in the spoken word performance poet scene. And I don't like the term spoken word or performance poet. I don't like those terms, but those scenes, those communities exist. Um, and I remember, and for a time, foolishly, I was one of them. But I remember, many poets in those communities saying, "I don't read other people's work." And because I want my work to be purely authentic. Well, what generally happens in that case is that if you don't read other poets' work, your poems start sounding the same all the time. Or they sound like whomever you're being influenced by, which in that community was generally rap music. And so, even though, and hip hop, and so even though you weren't reading Sonia Sanchez, you were listening to Kendrick Lamar, and so your poems come out sounding more like Kendrick Lamar than you, but you think that they are authentically your voice. And I think that's foolish. And many young poets, I mean, hopefully that's changed, but many young poets I've spoken with have said those things to me. That I don't read other people's work. I don't want to be influenced. I want to push authentic. Well, no, what it is that you gain all these influences from all of these great writers. Um, you gain ideas and then you make them your own. Then you figure out ways to work them in your own voice, in your own approach, in your own craft vision. Um, and then you further or advance the ideas of the originators, but you've made them something different because now they're yours. So, um, I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you did.
Okay.
That was really good. I especially like what you said about getting out of the house. I like, or we like to ask your Write Better Together, how do you get out of your bubble? And that is absolutely perfect. Like we like getting people outside and
Yeah.
experiencing the world. So
Yeah.
that is really excellent. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So I have a few little get to know you questions if you're up for it.
Sure.
Awesome. But describe your perfect sandwich.
That's a great question. Well, I am pescatarian, and so I eat fish, but I don't eat any meat. I have often had dreams about a particular restaurant that's no longer at the corner of Milwaukee and North Avenue in Chicago and Wicker Park that used to make this incredible fried fish sandwich. And then the neighborhood gentrified and the place got bought out and I don't know what it is now, a bank or something. But um I thought that fish sandwich was incredible. I would say probably um a fried tilapia on a pretzel bun with lettuce, tomato, onion, a little bit of mustard, a little bit of barbecue sauce. Um, so in either a pretzel bun or a brioche bun.
Cool. Barbecue sauce and fish. I never thought of that before.
Oh, are you kidding? Well, it's
Interesting.
a black thing, Peggyann, but you should give it a shot.
I'll give it a try sometime. I will. So if you could, well, um, what is a character from a book, movie, or show that you're most like and why?
Most like? Wow.
Yes.
That's a great question. I don't know. Um, I will tell you that one of my favorite characters in all of literature is Ignatius J. Riley from A Confederacy of Dunces, which I hope somebody makes into a film at some day. But I am not really like him. Not similar to him. That's a really good question. You might have gotten me there. I would. Wow. I'm gonna have to think about that one. So,
Sure thing. Sure thing. No rush. If you could be the best at anything besides writing, what would it be?
um, being a father, but you know, probably I'd love to be a good dancer.
Cool.
I,
Me
but
too.
I'm not a good dancer, Peggy Ann. You don't ever want to see that.
Same here.
But um, yeah, I play tenor saxophone, and I played tenor saxophone for years, but I haven't played it consistently, seriously. So I want to be I want to be a good saxophone player, you know. So
Awesome.
we get
That's
back
really
to
cool.
that.
Um, what's your favorite song?
Did you say
That you,
song?
yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Um, I am a big music junkie. I'm a big music head. And I listen to so many different genres and styles of music. Um, so I don't know. I would say that I would put, I'll give you a short list. I'll give you As by Stevie Wonder. I'll give you Ghetto Soundwave by Fishbone. Um, I give you Stop the World by Maxwell. Um, I'd give you what is the name of that song? It's a song by Kate Bush. Something with Malta. Um, I would hmm, I would say Alabama by John Coltrane. I'm really, I would say the doors of your heart by the English Beat. So, what I just, that the list that I just gave you, I would say Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos by Public Enemy. Um, you know, um, so I just gave you a list that encompasses hip hop, rap, hip hop, jazz, ska, funk, and whatever genre Kate Bush would be put in, which I think Kate Bush defines genre. But my tastes are all over the place. So
May I ask what exactly is ska? I've heard of it once or twice, but I don't really know what it is.
so there are, depending on who you ask, about 8 to 9 different types of reggae. and um and so ska is an early a precursor to what we know as reggae. Reggae is a slower beat, but if we go to blue beat and then rock steady and then ska, um would be sort of the foundations of what we now call reggae music. Reggae is a little slower. It's usually about half a beat slower, and ska is again, is faster. But it is an early form of what we now call reggae, that came out of Jamaica. Yeah,
Awesome. I did not know that. Cool. I will have to check it out. Thank you.
you're welcome.
So, last question. What kind of atmosphere do you need when you write? Like something cozy and dim, or like a lot of people around you, or that kind of
I
thing?
need quiet.
Mm,
Um, I need quiet. I need to be able to hear my thoughts. I need to be able to hear my body. I need to be able to hear my emotions. So I need quiet. Um, And it's interesting that you would ask that question because I am now about to start. Fridays are my writing days, and um, I haven't done a good job in honoring Fridays as my writing days, and I actually need to add more writing time into my life. But Fridays are
mm,
definitely writing days in my hectic schedule. Um, and I've not done a good job in honoring um, those Fridays. Um, I'll take a meeting because that's the only time that folks can meet, or I'll do some work for my nonprofit, or I'll deal with something with the university. And so I've decided that for this semester, and moving forward, that on Fridays, on my writing days, then I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave this house. Um, I had this thought in my head that I could, close the door in my office as I am now in our home, um, and not be distracted. And truth is that I am distracted. The kitchen's there, the TV's there, and so I've decided now that I have to, on Fridays, I'm literally going to get up and go probably to the faculty study on campus, and which is so it's not my office, because if I go to my office, then I'm gonna think about student work and all of that.
Right.
Plus, there's colleagues and students and grad students up and down the hall, and they make noise. Um, and so I'm probably going to get up and start going to the faculty library at the McFarland, faculty study, faculty lounge at the McFarland
Okay.
Library, um, to write. But it has to be someplace that's quiet. And I've learned now I got to get out of my house. I got to get out of um, the comfort zone that is this house, to go get serious, about my writing again. So that's about to start. Actually, it probably might start tomorrow.
Okay, awesome. Well, I wish you luck with that.
I thank you. I need it.
Good luck getting out of your bubble, as we say.
Yeah,
So, but thank you very, very much for being here with us, Professor Q. I really appreciate it, and I know that our viewers will too. And so please join us on Friday when we go somewhere fun and exciting. And I don't even know where I'm going to go, so we'll see. But thank you all very much for watching and have a wonderful week. Bye.
thank you.